Story 1. To make a bad decision or do something embarrassing and not be haunted by a viral video of it for the rest of their life. People are asking what terrible or embarrassing thing I did on camera that went viral. Sorry to disappoint you, but I am a lucky millennial who has mostly stayed out of the spotlight. Matter of fact, with 2,000 upvotes and counting, you are currently looking at my most viral moment. Story 2. Nothing. My parents were always terrible with money. When they were my age, they were recovering from almost going bankrupt. I swore I would never be like them. We are doing quite well financially, partially because of experiencing that when I was younger. Story 3. A custom 3-story home built on 20 acres of land. My mom was a stay-at-home mom who worked the craft show circuit, and my dad worked as a floor manager at a small local print shop. He made $20 per hour. Story 4. My parents bought their first house in 1968 for the princely sum of £3,000, or £44,000 in 2024 money, 51,000 United States dollars. My grandfather told them they would be in a lifetime of debt, and they were crazy. They sold it in 1986 and bought their second home in 1986 for £27,500, or £79,000 in 2024 money, 102,000 United States dollars. They have owned and paid off 2 houses, and their house is worth over £250,000 now. They are not rich either. It was something people on a regular income could do back then. For me to get a house in 2024 would cost me over $350,000 here in Florida. Realistically, over $400,000 though to have enough room, unless I can get a really good deal on a rural property and a United States Department of Agriculture loan or something. Realistically, I am approaching 50 and do not want to get into a 30-year mortgage at this point in my life. Story 5. My parents bought a 2-story house for about the same cost as the current 2-year tuition for a community college. They were also able to make mistakes without being videotaped and shared on social media, which often leads to strangers cyberstalking them in a mob justice style. They were able to walk with family all the way to a plane gate, helping with bags and boarding the plane, and watch it take off from the concourse before leaving, instead of just dropping them at the airport door. Story 6. Well, it's hard what I'm going to say. The truth is that I don't laugh, but I'm disgusted by the way our ancestors were. But before, it was very normal to beat their partners. Watch the parodies of Family Guy. It's crude, but there is some truth in it. Story 7. Not a single thing. We ate things like hamburger helper and butter noodles for food. Never traveled unless we were staying with family or sleeping in a tent. Got hand-me-down clothes for the kids. And my mom notably cut the shoulder pads out of suit coats once they were out of fashion instead of replacing them with more modern styles. I don't ever worry about money in the way that they did. I'm very appreciative of the suffering that they went through to raise kids, and am helping them out as much as I can now to ensure that they get to live their best life now. Story 8. Nothing. I am better off than them at their age. By no means am I well off though, just one of the few perks of having parents from a poor country, I guess. Story 9. A home. It wasn't much. Just a flat under a building's roof with only a bedroom for the 4 of us with no floor. Nothing. But they had enough to pay for it. Later, they did better, had money to buy a cheap apartment, but big with 3 bedrooms in a part of the city no one like that is now very expensive. They bought a ruin to rebuild in the countryside that's now a lovely cottage and were able to pay for a few holidays here and there. Story 10. A house with children and 2 vehicles. They were able to take family vacations and kept the house stocked with groceries. My mother was also able to be a stay-at-home mom. None of that seems achievable anymore. Story 11. Nothing. We are considerably more secure financially than my parents were at my age, and up until 5 years ago my husband's mother too. Everyone goes on about the older generations having it all, but we talk very little about working-class poverty from their day and the repercussions of deindustrialization. Story 12. My parents could afford to buy a house and raise a family on one income. I'm juggling rent and bills. Feeling like home ownership is just a dream now. It's wild how different things are compared to their generation, especially when it comes to housing affordability. Story 13. A house. Hands down, that is the biggest one. Back in the day, you could get a decent home without drowning in debt for 30 years. Meanwhile, we are out here with rent that costs as much as a mortgage, trying to save for a down payment while everything else, groceries, gas, and healthcare, is skyrocketing. Story 14. My parents were a doctor and an engineer. There were 4 kids in the house, and my dad had 3 from a previous marriage. There are a lot of things that I could list, and the one that immediately comes to mind is when our nonviolent retriever bit a kid. He was asking for it. And my mom made a comment about how we were going to get sued and something about not wanting to put it on the homeowner's insurance. She said, "I'm just going to offer this kid's mom $50,000 and hope she doesn't come after us for any real money." This was in the late 1990s. I'm now in my late 30s. I make 6 figures and have no kids. I would lose my mind if I had to give somebody $50,000. Story 15. My parents were taking us to the bargain bins at Kmart and shopping at Goodwill, but they were still able to get into a house in a good area. The house was a disaster when we moved in, but I recently looked it up on Zillow and its estimated value is close to $750,000. It's still a poor quality house looking at the photos. Story 16. My dad had a house near the beach, a nice boat, and he owned a decent business. I have kids in college living at home and a 10-year-old car. A new car would be nice, but I can wait until my kids move out. Story 17. My parents bought their home in Silicon Valley for about $35,000 in the 1970s. That would be about $170,000 today, but it recently sold for $3.7 million. So even after adjusting for inflation, it would cost me 22 times as much money to buy the house I grew up in than my parents paid for it. Granted, Silicon Valley is a particularly expensive place that got especially gentrified after the technology boom, but the extreme price change applies everywhere else too. I cannot buy a home anywhere in the entire western half of the country for $170,000. The best I can hope for is a mobile home. A permanent structure house that isn't condemned and comes with actual land is a minimum of $300,000. Something as nice as what my parents owned back then would be a minimum of $700,000 in any area. Story 18. An actual house. I finally just put in an offer that got accepted on a condominium after more than 2 years of looking. A house is just completely out of the question. Story 19. I'm significantly better off than my parents were at my age. The chief reason being my parents. They had no support network, so if things got tough, they had no one to fall back on. I have my parents, who have made sure I've had the support I need anytime times have gotten hard. Story 20. Nothing. My parents could afford way less than I can now when they were my age. I'm grateful now that I can spoil my mom a little now. I wish my dad were still around to enjoy it, too. They both worked hard so that my brother and I could have a good life. Story 21. My parents had 2 children, owned 60 acres and a house. I have to budget so strictly that I have a calculator for my tire tread on my car, so I know when I have to buy new ones. Story 22. Absolutely nothing. I am doing 100 times better financially than my boomer parents ever did. When I was a kid, we lived in poverty. I was lucky to get 1 meal a day, 2 if school was in session because I had free lunches. Story 23. Life. When my dad was my age, he was already married with a child and had been a homeowner for 4 years with 2 cars. He had all that, was able to go on vacations every year, and do whatever he wanted to do. Here I am, at the same age, barely able to afford to live on my own. The few luxuries I do manage to get, I have someone telling me I shouldn't enjoy myself and that I should live my life in complete struggle. Story 24. My dad made $12 an hour as a Ford dealership service manager in 1992. I am making about double that, adjusted for inflation. I have a much nicer house than he did and did it on a single income. Also, forget him. Story 25. A house, 2 cars, health insurance, dental care, home insurance, family vacations and family retreats, food, braces for us kids. To be fair, I have some of these things, but only due to my mother's support. I'm scared for my future and my kids. Story 26. They had 8 kids and kept us all fed, clothed, housed, along with educating all of us. That took time and money. Dad retired on disability at the age I am at now. I had no kids, and so money was put into retirement. Anything they could buy, I can buy 10 of. They taught me not to be a fool with my money along with many other things. Story 27. My parents died before they reached my age, But at 35, they had an 8-bedroom house, 3 cars, live-in help, 2 people, private school for the kids, a horse, steaks, lobsters, original art, a grand piano, and travel money. Story 28. Probably not much, as they were only 5 years removed from the death of Mao Zedong and the ensuing major reforms done by Deng Xiaoping. Keep in mind, post-secondary schools weren't even open when Mao Zedong governed, and China was overall just really poor back then. I doubt my parents, at the age of 21, would be able to afford something I can't. Story 29. My dad was 40 when he had me. I grew up super comfortable and spoiled, being the youngest of 3. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad was pretty successful. He owned multiple homes and a lot of property back in India, where he migrated from. He took care of all his siblings and extended family. I turn 40 next year and currently have my firstborn on the way. Knowing for a fact that I'll be struggling to give him the upbringing I had just gets to me at times. Story 30. A new car. My mom got a new minivan when she was my age, paid for in cash from my stepdad. Thanks to the divorce, I can barely afford my bills. A new car, which I need due to my car being over 10 years old, is completely out of reach. Story 31. A house, 2 cars, 2 children. I live in an apartment with my girlfriend and we both use public transport. We might have wanted children, but we are now about 5 years older than when our parents already had their first kids. Yet financially, we lag behind so much. The world is tough. Story 32. To not graduate high school, buy a home, remodeling and extensions on the home, 3 kids, 2 cars, a fully stocked deep freeze, fully stocked kitchen, lawnmowers, washer and dryer, 3 televisions, a camper, 2-week vacation off of work. Not actually going anywhere, we were not big on traveling, both smokers, and we're not even middle class. Story 33. It's quite reversed. My family and I live much more comfortably and farther from the edge than either my parents or my wife's folks. I suspect it will be likewise for my children. Story 34. Financially, nothing really. I can see a house or to travel being a common thing here for anyone who is in their early 30s or younger. I am in my mid-40s, so I made the cut in buying a house before the total whack post-pandemic pricing. Story 35. Me and my partner are both on median wage in the United Kingdom. My parents both worked for themselves and earned more money than that for the time. I have way more financial freedom than they did. Story 36. A 4-bedroom house with a garage big enough for 3 vehicles. A boat, a camper, for vehicles, a truck, a van, a car, and a motorcycle, and 3 to 4 vacations per year. They were middle-class baby boomers. Story 37. House, cars, motorbikes, a caravan, holidays, having kids, paying into a pension. They could afford life. Neither parent studied past high school. Dad was a window fitter, and Mom worked in a pretty low-level civil service job. Both retired before 60. I was definitely born at the wrong point in history. To be fair, things did kind of go to ruin in 2008 because the mortgage payments went crazy, but they managed to keep their house and have recovered pretty well. Story 38. A house. I looked up the cost of the house I grew up in when they paid and its current price 20 years older. They couldn't afford it working the same jobs in this economy either, no matter how hard they worked. This much older house is too expensive compared to its younger counterpart. Also, kids. An education, theirs was free, medical treatments, everything. Story 39. 10 days ago, I was exactly the age my mother was when she had me. When I was 5 years old, they bought a house. I do not see myself buying a house in 5 years. Story 40. A house and multiple cars. It helps too that they had a dual-income household, both with well-paying jobs. I make a decent amount of money, enough to be considered middle class in my region, but it still feels impossible to even have a fraction of what they could comfortably afford. Story 41. A house and kids. But they also had to work harder than I do. I was taught to work smarter, not harder in a lot of different ways. I'm pretty thankful for that. Mission accomplished. Story 42. 5 houses between the 2 of them. 2 beach houses that were rental properties in the summer. 1 house that was a rental property in the winter next to a ski resort. 1 4-story townhouse where my mother lived full-time. 1 beach house that was not a rental property. Story 43. I was about 10 years behind them but got there and was able to buy a home. However, they also owned a rental property and a ski condominium in Colorado, both of which feel quite out of reach. Story 44. A house, 2 cars, a vacation here and there. All that on one parent working. I have a condo, can't afford a real house, and a 20-year-old car, and my career pays more, adjusted from my parents' day, than what my dad earned. Story 45. When you hear about how older people turn successful, I often think to myself that I will never be able to take those risks with the cost of home ownership, fees, sales taxes, and costs of education. It is impossible to think of how you can pivot or take those same kinds of risks. Story 46. Newer than 80-year-old house, 2 cars newer than 5 years old, a pickup, motorcycle, muscle car, family summer road trips, and camping. Mother worked part-time, and both parents had no post-secondary education. Both parents had 2 addictions. I have none. Wife has a university degree, and I'm in skilled trades. We can't afford half the things they provided despite saving more money and getting education and skills. Story 47. My grandparents had a 6-bedroom house and were very well off. Grandmother was a stay-at-home mom. Grandfather was a miner. I can only afford a 3-bedroom house. My parents weren't so lucky. There was a massive drug problem here when they were teenagers up to around their 30s. Thankfully, they were able to steer clear of the actual drugs, but a massive proportion of their friends died. They got caught up in the fallout of all that and only started with steady careers in their 30s. My siblings weren't born then, but I have memories of my dad having to steal food for us to eat that day and of him coming home on a Friday many times saying he had been laid off, and my mom running inventory on all the food and money in the house to see how long we could last.